Hello YouTube friends, Dr. Teresa here again. Today's topic is about using a chiller on a Dwarf Seahorse tank. And once again, this topic was generated from BOE 360, so thank you BOE. Well, I thought that was a very interesting thought. Now, when I had larger seahorses, I did contemplate getting a chiller, but it was just so expensive I couldn't justify the cost. I know people who have used them and it actually has extended their seahorse life because of it. The advantages of having a chiller is that it keeps the temperature range below a certain point that prevents such bacteria as Vibrio from reproducing and causing the seahorses to get ill and eventually die. Vibrio is very virulent when temperatures are elevated above 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Basically what happens once you rise above that 74 degrees, the seahorse immune system, seahorses in general, their immune system becomes depressed and is not as strong. And then the Vibrio species, for example, will start reproducing a little bit faster. And for each degree higher above 74 degrees, that bacteria will reproduce exponentially. That means it's multiplying in multiples very, very fast. And it's not too long with that combination of a depressed immune system and a very, very quickly increasing bacteria rate that the seahorses are overcome. Now, I find the dwarf seahorses tend to be a little bit hardier and they do okay with very short fluctuations in temperature. But I never thought about getting a chiller for a dwarf seahorse tank. For me, it seemed strange to invest hundreds of dollars in a piece of equipment for a 10-gallon aquarium, or at the times I've also had smaller aquariums for dwarf seahorses. So potentially a chiller could be even larger than the aquarium. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, and it also depends on where you live. If you live in a warm region and you don't have options to keep your water cooler, that might be something that you have to invest in. But I just recommend being very careful because I am aware of people who did buy chillers for the seahorses and they did not test it or let it run a course on a test tank first before putting it right onto their seahorse tank. And there was some sort of residue left in the device through manufacturing, natural oils, whatever it is, that are left over, and it got into the tank and poisoned their seahorses. And they really had a hard time getting them to recover. It was several weeks. I think eventually they did get them to recover, but it really did devastate their seahorses. So I just admonish you, please be careful if you do decide to invest in a chiller. But for me, because I have a 10-gallon aquarium, when I had it upstairs, when my office in my home was located upstairs, I just used a small little fan, very low wattage, and I ran it across the surface. And it definitely made a difference. Within an hour or two, it would lower the tank temperature by 1 or 2 degrees, which was all I needed. That worked out just great. Now, when I did that, of course, I had to replenish the tank with fresh water that did not have salt in it, because really that process of evaporation that causes the water to cool depletes the water level. And as that water comes out and evaporates, the salt stays behind and only the water evaporates out. So it's really important to replace that evaporated water with just fresh water that does not have salt. But I did eventually end up moving my aquarium down to a lower level in my house, a basement area that we had refinished, and that's now where my office area is. And the tank stays very stable between 68 degrees and 74 degrees, which is the perfect recommended range. In fact, some people think the closer to 68 degrees Fahrenheit that you can go, the more likely that your seahorses will remain healthy, because basically that bacteria such as Vibrio remains more or less dormant. So those are just my thoughts on getting a chiller. I'm curious to hear if BOE does end up getting a chiller and how that works for him, because I never thought about getting one for dwarf seahorses. So I'm really glad he suggested that, and I'd be interested from hearing from any of you who decided to get a chiller for your seahorses, especially your dwarf seahorses. Well, thanks so much for following along. I always appreciate you here with me, and take care.